Hey everybody, what is going on? It's time for another episode, episode 9. Today we're talking about namespaces.
I am Savage, son of Alvin, son of Joseph of House Noble, first of my name, and raider of pelts.
What are you blabbering about? I was about to explain namespaces, not lineage and titles.
I know not of your name space. I raid rival clans. I collect pelts.
And where are you exactly? What year is it there?
I am in the wilderness, in the pre-modern times. It is a time of raids. I need pelts to survive.
Uh-huh. Like animal pelts. Why do you need pelts?
Everyone needs pelts. I do not like your tone, soft round man. Perhaps I should raid your clan and steal your pelts.
I don't have any pelts. You're obsessed with pelts. And you never answered me. Where are you exactly?
I am in the Peltlands. I'm readying my men for the next raid.
What is that you're in? It looks like a drop cloth from Home Depot's paint department.
This is my tent. I live here.
So you supposedly live there. There's not very much stuff in that tent. And what's that behind you? Is that LED lighting?
No, that is the moon shining its light over the countryside. I am in a tent, readying for the raid.
Yeah, of course it is. So why do you need all those pelts again? Wait a second. How are you even shooting video if you lived that long ago?
I know not of such words as video. I gather pelts from those I raid. I seek the most fantastic pelts.
I know I'm going to be sorry for asking. Where do you find the most fantastic pelts?
Just last week, I captured the most beautiful pelt. It had interlocking G's on it. I raided it from Clan Gucci.
I suppose you want pelts from the Jordash clan next.
Do not be so brash with me, squishy bald one.
Squishy bald.
I happen to not want Jordash pelts. They are too tight and curvy for me.
Right, that's what it is. Can I get back to namespaces now?
I am Savage, son of Alvin, son of...
Hang on. Do I recognize... Hey, how did you get in my backyard? Hey!
Pelts! I need pelts!
What in the fuck? Okay, so let's get into namespaces. Namespaces are a way that we can keep code together. For instance, there are namespaces throughout the .NET framework and .NET Core framework that put things like file operations. If you want to read a file, write a file, those are all under the namespace system.io, IO being input, output, and that makes sense because reading and writing files is input and output. So we can use namespaces as well to organize our own code, and we can use using statements to control what our code can see and to help us deal with collisions. And we'll take a look at what those are. So I'm going to create a new project, and you know the drill here. I'll speed through. You can check out the first 4 or 5 episodes if you need to see how we're setting up these projects, but by now it should be pretty familiar. So let's get to that. We'll call this noble cause.namespaces. All right, so this is where we normally start off. We're going to take a look at the default namespace first. If you notice, the program CS here started in the namespace noble cause.namespaces, which is also the name of our project. So if I right-click my project file and go to Properties, you can check out the default namespace right here. Now, you can change that if you want to, but it's pretty standard to leave that as is. What we're going to do, though, is I'm going to right-click the project, and we're going to make a couple of folders. So I'm going to go to Add, and then New Folder, and we'll make one folder called Models, and one folder called Services. And then inside Models, I'll right-click Models. I'll add another folder in there. We'll call that Domain. And then I'm going to right-click Models again, add a folder, and call it API. So now let's make some classes. I'm going to go into the API folder by right-clicking, and I'm going to add a new class by selecting Class. The name of this class is going to be User. I'm going to make this class public, and I'm going to make a public auto property called FirstName. Another quick way to do that, if you don't want to type all that, I'll add another auto property called lastName, but this time I'll do it with something called code snippets. I can just type the word prop, and you can see the code snippet help comes up. And it says right here in the little note, if you can read that, it says tab twice to insert the prop snippet. So I'll tab once, tab twice, and now I'm hovering over the data type. So if I just type string, it'll erase int. And now I have to tab twice again to get to the property name. I can name it last name and hit enter when I'm done, and it puts my cursor at the end of the line. So that's kind of a cool way to make new properties. We also have some using statements up here that are bringing in some namespaces that we're not using. The way Visual Studio tells us they're not being used is it makes them as light gray color. If they were being used, they would be white. So I could just highlight them and delete them, or I can just pick any one and right-click and choose Remove and Sort Usings, or I can use the shortcut Control-R, Control-G. What that'll do is, if it's not being used, the ones in gray will disappear. If there are some that are being used, it'll put them in alphabetical order. So I'll just select that and clean up my class. So my user class lives in noblecause.namespaces. That was the default namespace. And then it lives in a folder called models, and inside that folder is another folder called API. And you can see that in my project explorer here on the right, that I have the project, models, API, and then the user class. So what would happen if I tried to put another user class in API? Well, it's not going to let me, because we can't have two classes in the same namespace with the name user, and it tells me the username already exists. Now we can fake that and force it. I can hit new class and just name it anything like foo, and then I can rename foo to user, and it again will stop me. So even if I left it foo and made the class name user, you can see the red underline under here saying that the namespace models.api already contains a definition for user. But what if I really needed another user? For instance, this user could be used on an account screen somewhere in an application. We might have a billing department that has a different type of user. Maybe it has things added to it like your current balance or money owed or credit due or whatever it is the billing department needs, but they also want to call it a user. We could add that user in another namespace. So under API, I could put a folder called billing, and then inside billing, I could add another class, and now I can call it user. And the reason that it lets me do this is there's no longer a collision. I have a noble cause namespaces models API billing user, and I also have just the regular models.api user that's not in the billing namespace at the end. I can also right-click these usings, remove and sort, and now you can see just by going back and forth, really the only difference in the namespace is that I've added billing. Before we can use this, let's put in a prop. We'll make it a decimal, and we'll call it balance, if I can spell balance. So now let's go into our program CS and see how to use these two different user classes. I'm going to go ahead and right-click my using at the top and remove and sort to clean that up. Now in here, I'm going to create a regular user, and I'm just going to put new user. Well, main has visibility into noblecause.namespaces, but there is no user class that lives in noblecause.namespaces. If we had a user class here in the project, it would pick that up. Also, if we hard-coded or went back to one of our user classes and just removed the models.api, let's say, and told this user class, now you exist in noblecause.namespaces, you can see that user is no longer underlined in program CS. But I don't want to do that. I'm not going to move all of my classes into one namespace because that's going to get messy. So how do I tell program CS how to see this user class? There are two ways to do that. One is to fully qualify the name of the user, including its namespace. So I could put noblecause.namespaces.models.api.user, because that's the namespace that user is in for our non-billing user, the one inside just this API folder. It's this guy here, right? It's in the models API. So notice that Visual Studio says, well, we're already in noblecause.namespaces, so I'll allow it, but I'm going to make this gray for you to tell you, you don't really need this part. All I needed to know was from here, where do I go? So I can do a couple things. I can highlight this, including the dot, and delete it, right? It's fine with that. Or if I wanted to, I could hover this and hit the little light bulb, and it says simplify the name noble cause namespaces models blah blah blah, and it shows you that it would be removing here in red, and the new line would look like this if that's what you want to do. That is what I want to do, so I'm going to select that. And then we can do our user dot first name equals Savage, user dot last name equals Coder, and we can console.writeLine. Look at that. It's not giving me any IntelliSense. Why not? I'm hitting Control Space and I get nothing. So the reason is, and it's telling you already, I don't know what console is. The name console does not exist in the current context. Well, the current context is noblecause.namespaces. And console happens to not live in noblecause.namespaces. Why doesn't it work now and it worked in all the other examples? Because remember, when I right-clicked and removed and sorted those using statements, at the time, I didn't have a need for system. And that's where console lives. So if I put using system, Now it knows that console is a class that has a write line method. I'll put my string interpolation and just put user.firstname space user.lastname. And everything's happy. Let's prove that. And there you go, Savage Coder. Okay. So how did I know where console was? Just because I've been a developer in .NET for years and years and years. If you don't know, though, just Google it. We're going to say .NET Core, because that's what we're programming in. Console namespace. And we're looking for docs.microsoft.com. Here's the console class. And without even clicking on it, it tells you the namespace that it's in. So we can just add using system. If you want to look at the documents, it'll also always have the namespace right here below the class name. So you can find all of that, and it'll give you some examples here where it shows you that it's doing using system to get the console to work. Okay, so now if we want to use the other user, we know we can say var billing user is equal to a new, and I can just put models.api.billing user. That works. Billing user.balance equals $100. Along with these namespaces and usings, you can bring in other classes in the .NET framework. Remember when I said that we could write a file? So if I go into system.io.file, I can write all text, and I can give it a path. I'm going to open a folder in File Explorer where my program lives. So I'm going to right-click my project and go to Open Folder in File Explorer. And then I'm going to copy the path up here. And it's going to complain, but we'll fix that. And I'm going to give it an actual file name called myfile.txt, comma. The second argument here is the contents of the file. So I'm just going to put hello, noble cause code. And I need my semicolon. So the reason that it's complaining here is when we're inside string literals or inside double quotes, we use the backslash character as an escape. We might need to use a backslash. For instance, some characters need to be escaped or they don't make sense. Let's say I wanted to create a variable called my data, and I wanted it to equal a quote, a double quote. Well, how can I do a double quote? Because if I add one, now it doesn't know what's going on. The data that we assign to our variable is in between the quotes, but the second quote, it's reading as the closing quote, but then there's another single quote. So it doesn't understand that. So the way we tell C#, no, I want this actual character, don't treat it like the quote around that we put around the string. I would use an escape character or a backslash. So now it knows, oh, okay, once I'm in escape mode here, the next character after that, I'm going to take whatever it is literally and not try to use it as part of the syntax, right? So how can I put a backslash in here when backslash is my escape character that tells things like that? There's two ways we can fix this. One is we can escape our backslash with an escape character. So if we replaced each one of those with two of those, you see the red lines are going away. The other way is that we can tell C# nothing else inside my string needs escaping. All of the other characters in here are perfectly valid other than the backslashes. And the shortcut to treat all of these backslashes not as escape characters, but as the actual character is the @ sign. So I can put the @ sign before the quote. And you've seen that before with interpolation. We can put the $sign before a quote, and that tells it this string is going to have interpolated data. But in our case, we just want to tell it, treat those slashes as slashes, not as escape characters. And so if I run this code, I'm going to get rid of this guy here. If I run this code and we open up our folder, you can see my file.txt got created. And if I bring that in here, it says, hello, mobile files code. And you can do whatever you want with files. You can copy files. You can create directories. All that stuff is under system.io, .file, .directory, etc. If we just had written file.writeAllText, it wouldn't know what file is. Just like we used a using for system, we can also add a using for system.io. And now it knows what file is. So it's up to you whether you want to type the whole thing out. I prefer using statements because it makes my code a little more clear and concise. All right, last thing I want to cover here is namespaces, using those with Nuget packages. A lot of times the code that we want has already been created by someone else and it's been tested out, and we can just go grab it and use it. There's a ton of free libraries out there that do things for us. I'm going to show you one that writes out Lorem Ipsum. If you don't know what Lorem Ipsum is, you can go to the Lipsum generator at lipsum.com. It'll give you a history on Lorem Ipsum, but basically when people used to lay out newspapers before computers were around and they had to actually set type and press ink onto paper, they needed to lay out their newspaper stories first. So they didn't have the story yet, but they needed to reserve some space where the story was going to go. So they would tell their reporters, hey, I'll give you this many lines on the front page, and I'll reserve those lines for you. And so they would mock up their layout using Lorem Ipsum. So let's say I was going to give 2 paragraphs for the story. I can type 2, and I can generate my Lorem Ipsum. Here are my 2 paragraphs. They're garbage. They're not real words, but they look like English. They are spaced. They are common lengths. And from a distance, at a quick glance, it would fill up space the same way that English would. So maybe if you're making a website or you need to show someone a layout of something in some code that you're creating, you might need some Lorem Ipsum. I wouldn't want to create code that follows the rules of Lorem Ipsum. I'd rather use someone else's code that already knows how to do that. So I'm going to right-click Dependencies, and I'm going to go to Manage Nuget Packages. Now, by default, it shows us packages that are already installed in our project. We don't have any yet, so this is empty. We want to click the Browse tab, and I'm going to search for LoremNet Core. So here is Lorem.net Core, and it's a .NET Core port of the original Lorem.net package. I'm going to come over to the right and click Install. And a little license will pop up. You can just click OK to that. And that's it. It's installed. So now we can use our Lorem.net Core. Well, how? Where did it go? What did it do? If we expand dependencies and then packages, you can see Lorem.net Core. And there's some other information below it. It shows the actual .dll file that it downloaded. It's ready for use. I'm going to assume that if I just start typing LoremNet Core, it will give me IntelliSense and tell me what namespace it lives in. So I'll hit Tab and then dot. And it looks like it has 2 classes, Generate and Source. I want Generate, because I want to generate some Lorem Ipsum. If I go inside Generate, there we go. We have things like date, time, emails, hex number, number, paragraph. Well, paragraph is like what we saw online on the web. Random, a sentence, a number of words. Well, let's try recreate what we did on the web. I'm going to say paragraphs, and for the word count, I'm just going to do 200. For my sentence count, I'll do 4 sentences and give me 3 paragraphs worth of that. LoremNet core. See, that worked. And just to show you the other way, if we use the little light bulb and change that on the bottom, that also worked. So if we run it, you can see the Lorem Ipsum is here. It would look better if it were formatted in a smaller container. You would take up more screen real estate, but we were able to bring that in and figure out how to use it. There are tons of other NuGet packages. Some of them parse JSON or help with API calls or database access or calling other APIs through sockets. There's just tons and tons. Pretty much anything you can think of is already done in NuGet, so feel free to check those out and play around with some of them. And don't forget that Google is your best resource when trying to figure out syntax and what namespaces classes live in. And so that's kind of it for the basics on namespaces and using. So that wraps up this 9-episode series on the real basics, the watered down beginner version. Make sure you practice, please. This stuff will become easier and easier to do the more you use it. Starting in the next episode, episode 10, we're going to start building an application. I'm going to show you the front end of a new web app, and we'll start building the back end with all of the things we've learned, plus some new things. So I can't wait to get started on that. I think it'll bring it all back together, and we'll start learning some web API. So until then, I'll see you online.